everyone, welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology, and with me today is a special guest, Professor Craig Van Slyke. Craig is a fellow philosophy podcaster who focuses on what it means to live a fulfilling life, drawing on influences ranging from Stoicism to modern positive psychology. Today we'll be examining the topic of self-leadership, what it is, where it came from, and what it means. All right, Craig, thanks for being on the show. Why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners about yourself?
Sure. I'm a professor of computer information systems and have been for a long time now. I'm a former business school dean, department chair, associate dean. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in industry, primarily in the engineering world. I was an early adopter and early implementer of computer-aided drafting. So you can tell that was a long time ago. And I currently teach at Louisiana Tech University, but full disclaimer, what I'm saying here has nothing to do with my university or really my job there. My wife and I and her mother live literally in the middle of the woods in Northeast Louisiana. We have 3 dogs, 3 cats, 2 goats, and 2 horses got about 30 acres here that is literally surrounded by woods. So it's a nice, peaceful existence. And it was a great place to be during COVID, without a doubt.
Nice. Yeah, I'm from New York, so everybody assumes I'm from the city, but I'm from Western New York, so I'm kind of out in the middle of nowhere too. There's 60 acres that we can do stuff on and whatnot.
Nice.
But that's great. I knew some of your background from the things I had seen online. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I like them. They're short, so it was easy to get through a bunch of them, and it was interesting to hear what you had to say about some stuff. I can't wait to dive into it. Why don't you tell us, what is self-leadership in a nutshell? What's kind of the overview of it?
So leadership is trying to persuade others, to get others to act in some coordinated manner, achieving some sort of a goal or serving some sort of a purpose. Self-leadership, to me, is simply doing that for yourself. So it's really a matter of trying to take control of your life and live it in a more purposeful way. And purposeful on a couple of different levels. So maybe one level is like intentional. So really trying to be more intentional about what you do, how you think, who you want to become, that sort of thing. So just like an organization has a leader that tries to get everybody coordinated and moving in the same direction, well, you know, your brain and your daily activities and that sort of thing for most of us are just kind of scattered. And so self-leadership is trying to bring that back into focus and getting all those pieces of your life pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, I can relate to that a little bit. My day job is I'm a plant manager for a manufacturing plant, and I can see the crossover there. Sometimes it's easy to go home and it's if you're not focused or having a purpose in what you're doing, it's a lot like if I didn't show up for work one day and the employees just were able to do whatever they wanted, right? If I just go home and I don't have, if I go home and I don't have a plan for what I'm going to do, I don't end up doing anything really, right? So what are the pillars of self-leadership?
So this is a model that I developed with Andrea Christel, who is a philosophy professor. We were both at Northern Arizona University at the time. She was working in public philosophy, and I was dean of the business school. And we taught a freshman seminar on self-leadership. You know, when you teach, you want to have some kind of an organizing framework where students can kind of see how all the pieces fit together. And so we developed this idea of the pillars of self-leadership. And so it's 4 pillars: purposefulness, mindfulness, reflection, and practice. And if we can kind of tie most of what we would want to talk about regarding self-leadership into those pillars. And so they all support your this idea of you taking control of yourself.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. When I was listening to the podcast and you were talking about the pillars of self-leadership, I thought this is cool stuff because what we like to do in the show is just take one topic, kind of like we are today, and then really dissect it philosophically and look at what the sort of constituent parts mean. So, to me, like calling out those four things as being integral to this idea of self leadership is really important, and I'd like to look at them all each individually a little bit as we dive into it. So we'll ask some formative questions first. I think you covered it a little bit. So where did the concept of self-leadership come from? You said you developed it with somebody else. What was the impetus for that? What was the inspiration?
I can't really remember why I started thinking about it. And just to be clear, professor by the name of Manz, M-A-N-Z, kind of developed this concept in the research realm. And so we picked up on it, even though they have a different way of looking at it than we do. But I think it really came out of me wanting to exert some kind of control over my own life. Like a lot of people, I kind of let life happen to me for the first part of my life. Since I graduated from college a long time ago, had a degree in business, which I enjoy it. I like business. I'm still in that college, but I didn't have this really tight view of what I wanted to do with my life. And so I took a job teaching high school. I'd coached basketball for a couple of years, and I kind of liked it. I taught high school for 1 year, and I thought, good Lord, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. So I went back to school, got an MBA, and really didn't know any more about what I wanted to do with my life. And so it kind of went along that path. I started a business, a small business selling computer-aided drafting systems, ran that for a while, sold it, went to work for a couple of my clients. But it was almost like letting the tides push me around or letting the wind push me around. It wasn't quite the path of least resistance, but it wasn't far from that. And then finally, I kind of settled into this idea of being an academic. Really by happenstance, I had been teaching part-time at a local college, and we were training for a marathon, a bunch of us, and I was complaining about my job and talking about how much I liked teaching. And one of the guys said, well, why don't you teach full time? I said, you got to get a PhD to do that really right, which you don't really have to do, but that's, a good path to follow. And he said, well, why don't you get a PhD? Well, I didn't have a good answer for that. So I finally, took some level of control and said, okay, this is who I want to be. I want to be a college professor. Quit my job, went back to school, was poor for 4 years. And so I've thought a lot about why did it take me so long? It took me 10, 12 years to really settle into finding my purpose in life. And really took me longer than that to really nail the purpose. But, well, how can I help other people start to think about this a little bit earlier? We were teaching freshmen, so they're 18-ish years old. Let me get them started on thinking about how they can live the sort of life they want to live. And, we just kind of broke it down. You know how these sort of things go. You have all these topics and you're trying to organize them under different categories. But really what drove it all for me was purposefulness. That's the most important one. And everything else flows from that. And so once we had that settled, mindfulness comes out of not so much the Buddhist tradition, but really management of being aware of what's going on in your environment. Not just being out there without your radar out, seeing what's happening. Reflection came out of my experience at St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit school, and they're huge on reflection, both as a personal practice and as an educational practice. And then the idea of practice, Andrea contributed that. That's from Aristotle.
Nice.
How do you become something? Well, through practice.
Right.
Sorry, that felt kind of long-winded, but that's the story.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. We're not too structured on here, so shows will go anywhere from 38 minutes to an hour and 15. So, however long it takes to answer a question, we're just interested in getting down to the essence of the answer more than how long or how short it takes. So that's really interesting to me. So this idea of self leadership was sort of born out of your own personal experience, and the thing that sort of struck me about it when you were talking about it is that it doesn't seem, as you described it, it didn't seem like your life up to that point was something that lots of people would say was like a useless venture, right? A lot of people wouldn't say, "Oh, well, he wasn't just like sitting on the couch watching TV after." No, like, okay, well, he had some degrees and he started a business and he did this stuff. So a lot of people look at that and say, "Oh, well, it doesn't sound like there was anything to complain about." But I think that's misleading, right? Because it doesn't matter the level of success that you achieve or the things that you're doing. I think that what you're hitting at, and probably what you'll delve into a little bit here, is, you could, I'm a musician, right? So I could write a song in my studio, and suddenly it would hit the top of the charts, and I'd be famous or rich or whatever, right? But that wouldn't change the essence of my life and how I'm living and how I feel about how I'm living. And I think that throughout the history of humanity, you see that several times. You see musicians with these high suicide rates or these different problems that they might have. And some of it might even be directly attributable to some of their success. And that speaks to something deeper than this sort of superficial or, explicit indicators of worth that we put on things in society versus what it means to live a fulfilling life.
Right. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that, by the way. Although having a hit song wouldn't be a bad thing.
No, it'd be cool. Yeah, I'd be all for it.
Did you do your theme song? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. It's funny. When I was listening to the first episode, I thought, how did he get that licensed? Because it sounded so good. It's like, oh wow, how did he pull that off? So.
Yeah, no, that's me. Yeah, so I've got a recording studio. A little bit of background on me. People who listen to the show probably know a little bit here and there, but I don't actually talk about myself too much. But I've got a recording studio, and I play all the instruments. I write all the songs. I do all the mixing and mastering and stuff. And I've got a lot of different hobbies, right? And so this will be kind of pertinent to our discussion, right? You talked about how purposefulness is sort of this cornerstone of self-leadership, and how in your personal journey, it was that sort of lack of purposefulness that led you into discovering this. I find it interesting because sometimes I feel the same way. Like I'm somebody. The way my wife likes to describe it is my biggest hobby is having hobbies, right? So I'm a musician and a painter, and I am into fitness, and I go to school. I'm getting my doctorate. It's pretty much for fun. I don't work in academics or anything, but I was in the Army, so that allowed me to pay for school. And I've got a 3D printer, and I do a whole bunch of different things, and I really enjoy them, and I have a good time and stuff. But I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, right? I don't know. I don't have this defined goal in mind. The only thing that I know is I like learning new things, right? And I like applying them to things. But I don't know, maybe I'm somebody who needs some sort of self-leadership, something to say, hey, listen, this is a purpose, a uniting sort of purpose.
So I want to comment, if you don't mind,
sure,
on the phrase that you used. And you used the same thing, the same phrase that a lot of people do. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But part of the issue is the focus on what. And you want to focus on why. So why do I think I'm here? And I didn't make this up. This comes from Simon Sinek's Start With Why, which he applied primarily to businesses. And if you haven't watched that TED Talk, it's definitely worthwhile. It really changed the way I viewed leadership, and both professionally and personally. But what a purpose transcends that what. So like my purpose is to try to help people lead successful, meaningful lives. That's what drove me as a dean. That's what drives me as a podcaster. It's that same thing. How can I help other people find their purpose and use that purpose to live a meaningful life and to live a successful life. And so that's the purpose. Exactly how you do that and what, the world might label you as you're trying to pursue that purpose is really secondary to the purpose. That's why I really try to focus on this idea of the purpose driving everything. Everything should come back to that purpose. And so I'm glad you said it that way. We did not plan this in advance. It just worked out. But that's the problem is if somebody asks you, well, tell me about yourself. What's the first thing most people say? Well, I'm a plant manager. Yeah, I'm a plant manager. Exactly. I'm a professor, I'm a musician, whatever. But it's, that's an external label. And what might be better, although it would sound really weird, is, well, tell me about what do you do? Well, I try to help people live successful, meaningful lives, which would totally shut down any conversation. As soon as you said that, it'd just be, oh God, he's going to try to sell me some book or something. And, that would be it. But I think that it's a mindset change.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I think that you're right. It would depend on who you're talking to, but some people might find that fascinating and other people might say, okay, I'm going to find somebody else to talk to.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's a really, that was a really cool way of putting that. It transcends that what I want to be. It's beyond that. We'll dive into that a little bit later. I have some questions that specifically pertain to that. Sure. So looking at the formative a little bit more, what philosophies contributed to the development of self-leadership?
So I would say there are 2.5 that kind of contributed. Aristotle. Andrea is an Aristotle scholar, and so she brought a lot of that to the table and helped me understand some of his teachings. The Stoics, and maybe not in as direct a way as you might be thinking about, but there's an undercurrent of Stoicism in a lot of this, particularly the idea of what you can control and what you can't control. And then the half is a bit of Buddhism, but I really don't go too far with that. I mean, the Buddhist mindfulness is a particular thing, but it's got that undercurrent of what you can, they wouldn't put it what you can control and what you can't, but, what you can possess, which is basically nothing. So it's still that same idea of, what can you do? Well, you can, look at yourself as being not yourself, but part of the universe. And I'm not a Buddhist in any way, but that we drew on some aspects of Buddhism with the mindfulness piece. And then I guess I would, the reflection is in a lot of different philosophies, so I couldn't really tie that to any one.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of interested in is, so you mentioned the mindfulness sort of stems from Buddhist philosophy, and you mentioned reflection in regards to your experience with the Jesuits. What separates reflection and mindfulness, specifically as it relates to this?
So the kind of mindfulness that I'm talking about with self-leadership is not the clear your mind kind of meditation, but it's this conscious awareness of the world around you, of others, of, events, of sounds, of sights, whatever it is. And the more mindful or aware we can get, the more input we have for reflection. So if you have an encounter with somebody and you don't really pay attention to what they're saying, you don't pay attention to their reactions, you don't pay attention to the environment, what are you going to reflect on? There's not enough there to really give much substance to you reflecting on that encounter. But if you're mindful, if you're really aware, you're watching nonverbal cues, you're paying attention to, to what's going on around you. Is it a quiet corner of a coffee shop? Is it a loud bar? Where is it? All of those things that are going on around you. When you sit down and think about whether or not that encounter went well or not so well, now the mindfulness has given you a lot of different things. And I'm totally making stuff up here, but, maybe we should have gotten out of that loud environment because it was a really serious discussion. And maybe we should have gone and found a park bench somewhere, or, a corner of a coffee shop, like I said, or maybe it would have been better to have it in a more active environment. It got too heavy too quickly. And so maybe that was a product of the environment, or maybe the person was saying one thing, but the nonverbal communication or the tone of voice was communicating something else. And maybe you could have interpreted that a little bit more quickly. But if you aren't mindful of those different aspects of what's going on, how much can you learn from the encounter? So really the short answer is the mindfulness provides input into reflection.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's kind of that what you're taking out of things in the moment, and then reflection is sort of integrating that with your prior thoughts and things. And this is a big topic in psychology and education. My master's degree was in education, and they talked about this a lot and how it's affected by very much by the things that you mentioned. Like if a learning environment, for instance, is too loud or too busy or something, that can really negatively impact learners, and not even all of them. Some people can thrive in that kind of environment. And other people need quiet, need something like that. But also, in addition to that, social media, right, and kind of the proliferation of technology works into that discussion as well. They say, people, the brain gets used to these instant impulses, these dopamine hits and things. And as a result, people, they get in this mindset. They're sort of conditioned into reacting. And so a lot of people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to formulate what their response to something is going to be. And in the process of doing that, they may not actually hear what the other person's saying before they decide to respond to it.
Right.
So, so it's that provides a pretty clear answer to the question, what the difference between mindfulness and reflection there. I like that a lot. Is, mindfulness is that sort of soaking up the sensory stimuli that you're receiving, and then reflection is integrating that with what you know and what you're perceiving in order to formulate some thoughts about it. So the term self seems singular, but leadership implies at least two roles. What does this dichotomy say about the complexity of personality, do you think?
That's an interesting question. So, I am not an expert on this, so I could be way off what the current thinking is. But I think we have, at least I have, this internal director's commentary that's kind of running in my brain half of the time. And so, I'm doing something, but there's this other piece of it that's kind of soaking it in and evaluating, in the moment, which is not always good. And I think that's trying to engage that part of your mind and being more intentional is probably where the duality comes in. I'd have to think more about that because that's a really intriguing question. But I think that's where it comes in.
Yeah, this is something that we've talked about a few different times on the show, and there's some philosophical basis for it that stretches across different philosophers. But really, it's this sort of separation between I and me. Like there's the I and there's the me, and one of them is just like the being that exists, and then the other one is this concept of the what's controlling you, right? They've used the homunculus or the ghost in the machine, that sort of thing.
Right.
And I think that's, if I hear you right, I think that's kind of what self-leadership is talking about, is that a lot of us are going through life just letting the machine run, and there's no ghost behind it. There's nothing inspiring it. It's just kind of, okay, well, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis, and there is that lack of reflection that you're mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, including myself, with some frequency, we just go through life on autopilot, which I think is a different way of saying the same thing. It's just kind of set in motion and you go. In fact, I don't know if are you familiar with the airplane movie?
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's, if I give a lecture on this, I always have the autopilot, the inflatable autopilot from Airplane
right.
on the slide, because we really do. We just kind of drift along.
Yeah. And, I think that in psychology, they trace that back to it being like an evolutionary adaptation, right? Where they're saying, well, it's necessary because if you didn't put some things on autopilot, you'd just be overwhelmed by like sensory input. You'd be constantly trying to figure out what's going on around you all the time. So some measure of autopilot is necessary, and you can see that in human development too. Children are born and they grow this huge mass of neurons. And the most neurons you ever have in your life is when you're 2 years old, and then your brain starts to figure out what's important and what's not, and it begins to prune away things that aren't important, and it begins to myelinate things that are to increase speeds and protect them and things. And your cognition improves as a result of it. So some measure of autopilot is necessary, right? We wouldn't want to have to really think hard about it every time we wanted to do a simple task like, put one foot in front of the other to walk.
Right.
But I think that it's maladaptive in the sense that we get so good at it that we just start applying it to things that are actually important and are actually the essence of living life.
Yeah, that's the trick, is to separate those things out. What is it that I want to be intentional about? And what is it that I want to turn over to that, whatever you want to call it, the system one thinking, or, whatever you want to call it? Because we do have to have these automatic behaviors and automatic even thoughts just to get through the day. But, there's a balance. There's a mean. So one of the things Aristotle talks about is the mean. You want to find the mean between the vice of deficiency, I think. Is that right? And the vice of excess. And so, right. Somewhere, and it's not really a mean like it would be mathematically, but somewhere between those two is the right balance for you. And I guess part of what I would say is that a big part of self-leadership is, how do we find that balance between the necessary autopilot and what we want to be intentional about? So not only finding the balance, but putting the intentional on the right things.
Yeah, I think that is important. I had never heard the term self-leadership before encountering you, but this same thing had occurred to me at one point in my life when I was, finally becoming an adult and entering like the working world and stuff, and encountering, the majority of people who are just saying things like, oh, well, I can't wait for the weekend, right? Like it's Monday. And they're saying, well, this weekend, like basically Monday through Friday was just thrown away, right? That's just, right. Let's just get through this, right? There's Monday, and then there's Tuesday, and then there's, hump day, and then there's Friday Junior, and then there's Friday, and then we live our lives on Saturday and Sunday, right? And I remember thinking, man, this sounds miserable. Like this can't be right. Like, there has to be some, and it's a mindset shift, right? Is this idea of, well, why do I think this is bad? Why do I think work is bad? And examining those attitudes and then reinterpreting them in a different light and looking at, well, maybe, realizing that what I'm doing is important, or being lucky that I'm able to be compensated for the things that I do, or lucky to have access to the things that I do that allow me to live my life in a certain way. Some of those things add extrinsic value, but some of them do add intrinsic value in terms of how you feel about yourself and how you perceive your worth as a contributing member to society. So how do we find purpose? How do we do that?
So it's a real challenge, and it's an ongoing process. But you really think about, what is it that makes you feel better than anything else? What is it that there are a lot of different ways little tricks. Like if you won the lottery tomorrow and never had to work again, what would you do? Or if, Elon Musk gave you $100 million to do something with, what would you do with it? And, once you get past I'd play golf all day or whatever, and you start to really think about that more deeply, that can start to peel back some of the layers of what your purpose is. And what is it that makes you mentioned fulfillment. What is it that makes you feel fulfilled? So it's not this transitory pleasure. It's this deeper and more enduring kind of pleasure. One of the activities we gave our students was write your ideal obituary.
Hmm.
What would you want people to say about you when you're gone from this world, 60, 80 years from now, or however long it happens to be? What would you want people to say about you? And if it's his music was inspiring to me, or, his writing got me through difficult times, or whatever it is, you start to reflect on that. Well, why would I want somebody to say that about me? And it's really this idea of going deeper and deeper and deeper until something kind of strikes you.
Yeah, we're definitely getting into the meat of it and really into the philosophy part, which is what I like. And that last one is something that hits home with me pretty good, because my dad died about 3 months ago, and I remember being at his thanks being at his funeral, and he's a fantastic guy. He was really just great, and he made he was a really interesting, really talented artist, and he started his own business, and he did a lot of these things. And he ended up walking away in midlife from a lot of it in order to become a pastor. And, he went from making a lot of money to making no money, went from having a career that a lot of people consider prestigious to something that is, okay, well, people appreciate it, but it's not, it's not held in real high regard or whatever. But and it's something that had a huge impact on our lives and as a family. He'd have to run out in the middle of the night to help somebody in the hospital, or he had to do this or the other thing. But at his funeral, it was just mind blowing, the number of people that showed up and the number of people that talked and the things that they said and all this. And it does make you think. I've been somebody who hasn't really thought about what other people think a lot of my life. I've been doing a lot of the things that I've done just because I like doing them. And it does make you reflect on that question between, is the reason I'm doing these things, is it hedonistic? Meaning, am I just doing these things because I enjoy them as an activity? Or is there a deeper meaning behind why I'm doing them, right? And that's where purpose gets real interesting, right? Because let's look at purpose from different philosophical paradigms, right? If you have a Christian worldview, right, like my dad, then you have a preset notion of beliefs that might inform your purpose. Whereas somebody who might be an atheist and thinks that everything is here randomly by chance or whatever, they might draw purpose from a completely different inspiration. Do you think that there is an important role for those sort of foundational core beliefs on how you discover purpose? Do you think you can discover purpose outside of having those?
Maybe, but I wonder if there are very many people that don't have any core beliefs. Even an atheist might believe in community.
Right.
So there's probably some set of core beliefs that would be necessary, because those beliefs are part of what drive your purpose. If you're a Christian, you serve God and you serve Jesus in a certain way. And one of the ways that, in the parables, Jesus served others, tried to ease others' suffering and that sort of thing. And so maybe you draw some sort of a cue from that. Well, maybe my purpose needs to be other focused. A Buddhist might say, well, my purpose is to help other people try to find enlightenment. And so, and I think the strongest, I'd have to think about this some more to make a definitive statement, but it seems to me the most powerful purposes involve some other or some set of others. If it's just internally focused, we actually did an episode on this, can a hermit flourish? If you're out there by yourself and you never encounter another human being, can you really say that you lived a flourishing life? And, the answer is not clear. We came down on the side of no, but, we're just, Andrea and I are just a couple of randos out there in the world. We don't know everything, but I do think that those core beliefs that you have, whatever they are going to invariably help you focus on what you see as a worthwhile purpose and how that gives you your place in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is where, again, and this is what I like doing in this show, is taking people off the autopilot, right? Because this involves a very important interplay between ontological and metaphysical concepts, right? Ontological concepts are those things that sort of encapsulate what it means to be human. But metaphysical concepts are, things that relate to the outside world, right? And so your presuppositions or beliefs about those sorts of things definitely affect purpose. And so, like, let's say we did a series of episodes on absurdism or existentialism a little while back. And part of existentialism as a philosophy is saying, essentially, there's this, it's sort of almost anti-religious. It's like, okay, well, if I'm listening to science, right? All right. So there's probably a big bang. Everything probably traces back to that. There might not be a need for a creator. So maybe I'm just here by accident, and then maybe I'm going to die and nothing's going to happen afterwards. And everything that I'm doing here doesn't mean anything. Right. So if that's your mindset, right? If you have this existential dread, this sort of that kind of mindset, can you still find purpose if you essentially are almost admitting that life has no meaning?
Yeah, I'm pausing here because I want to filter my initial thought about that a little bit. If somebody truly believes that, then why would you even write it down? Why would you communicate that to somebody else? What's the point? So, I wonder if anybody's truly all the way that way. But even if all there is life here on Earth and it's all kind of random, why not lean into it in a way that makes it a little bit better while you're here? The other thing is, this is going to sound kind of flippant, I think, but also, what if you're wrong? Why not hedge your bets a little bit?
Yeah, and these are important philosophical concepts too. So that's kind of Pascal's wager, right? Which is saying that, like, okay, so if there is a God and you live a good life, you go to heaven. And if there is a God and you live a bad life, you go to hell. If there isn't a God and you live a good life, you lived a good life. But if there isn't a God and you lived a bad life, then you lived a bad life, right? So if you do the math, it makes sense to live a good life, because either way, you did some good, and if there is a God, hey, you get to go to heaven, right?
Yeah,
but if you guess wrong, then you end up in trouble.
Well, but if there's nothing out there, if the end is just the end, well, what have you lost?
Yeah, and I think that this comes back to the existential philosophers Sartre and Kierkegaard and de Beauvoir and them. Like you said, what if you really believed this, right? Then it's sort of like you're saying, well, if this is all there is, then why are you wasting your time doing things that you don't want to do anyways?
Right.
And like you said, if that's your initial reaction, then maybe you jump to hedonism right away. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to do all of these things that just make me feel good. But eventually you find out that those things might make you feel good physically, but at the end of the day, there's still something in you as a human. And whether or not you ascribe that to having a soul or just having a brain that's wired in such a way that it requires something deeper. It's still a fact that remains that you need something more than just the hedonistic part of it. And then you dive into this. So it does seem like even if you did have, regardless of what your prior beliefs are, your philosophy or religion or whatever, it does seem like there is a place for self-leadership for pretty much anybody.
Yeah, I think so. And, if this is all there is, then why not maximize your time here? And like you said, that idea of enduring or deep pleasure as opposed to just the hedonistic kind of pleasure is a really important point, because we've all done stuff because it felt good. And then the next morning, maybe it doesn't feel so good for whatever reason. And so, that's part of what flourishing is about, is what are those deep things that bring you a deep sense of enduring pleasure, enduring satisfaction. And that's what you want to pursue in life.
Yeah. And those things don't even necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. And in some point, I think that getting into the deep satisfaction reflects itself in the other way. Like a quick sort of throwaway analogy, right, is that at one point I decided I need to start eating better, right? So I cut out added sugars. And what I started to notice is that like apples and oranges and things started to taste really, really good, like really sweet. And I was like, oh, wow, this is almost like candy without, then of course you eat some candy and you notice it's different. But the point is, if you settle into this lifestyle, you start to think about it's that mindset shift again, right? If you think of work as vegetables, it's always going to be vegetables. But if you start looking at it and thinking, well, you know what, I'm doing something important here, and I'm having impact on people's lives directly around me, and in people that I don't know are benefiting from it, and this sort of thing. That mindset shift can sort of take that to a deeper level. So complete mindfulness isn't an achievable state. What do you think is the best we can do, though? Where do you think we should draw that line on the autopilot?
Well, and I want to emphasize again that I'm talking about an awareness type of mindfulness rather than the more meditative. Yeah. We'll go with that. Sure. Meditative sort of mindfulness. There is a balance. It's like a lot of things. There is a balance, but this is why knowing your purpose is so important, because your purpose can tell you what should you try to shift onto autopilot and what should you be more intentional about. And this also ties into the idea of practice. And so Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics, and I'm not sure if I pronounced that right either, lays out this idea of first you receive instruction about what it means to live an excellent life. And then you have to consciously practice these things, whatever these things are. Over time, that builds up a habit of acting according to the virtues that you want to try to pursue. And then eventually it becomes part of who you are. So what does it mean to be kind? So we have to teach kids, it's not kind, it's kind to share. It's not kind to push somebody, and so we teach kids, and, some of us have to practice this for a long time before we get it. And then you develop this habit of kindness. So if you've got a basket full of things at the grocery store and you see somebody behind you with one item, you do the kind thing and say, why don't you go ahead of me? And after a while, you don't really think about it much. And so you build this habit of being kind. And then eventually you become a kind person. And so I'm glad you mentioned that autopilot mode is necessary, because it can also be very useful in self-leadership. It's like a lot of management gurus say, automate these repetitive tasks, and then you can focus on other things. Well, you can do that for your life. You can say, okay, I want to be a kind person, or I want to be a thoughtful person, or I want to be a calm person. And then you just, okay, I'm going to have to do some things that make me consciously practice calming down, count to 10 or take a deep breath or whatever it is. And then over time, you don't have to think about it anymore. So at first you have to say, oh, okay, I've got to stop and count to 10. But then you just, are more chill.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's really interesting because it's sort of an inverse way of applying that, right? So we talked about autopilot as being this bad thing that we're trying to avoid, but you can use that to automate good tasks, and right. So you can be mindful, and that I think that kind of ups the mindfulness game. It's almost like a tiered system, kind of, from what I've had in my experience. Right, is that if you've automated these simple processes of being kind or considerate or calm or those sorts of things, then when bigger events arise that require more of your mental energy or more of your focus in order to be kind or in order to be calm, you have that reserve, mental energy in order to address those things, right, and be calm or be kind in those scenarios when it's much harder to do so. Are reflection and rumination two sides of the same coin, or are they different things entirely? Like, how do we draw the line between reflection and other less positive forms of thought?
So tell me what you mean by rumination.
So I guess rumination would be just sort of focusing on one thing sort of exclusively as you're thinking.
Okay. Well, so reflection is more intentional. I would say you reflect for some purpose and you reflect from some framing. I tend to want to reflect about events. So something happens. I got testy with my wife, or I yelled at one of the dogs, or whatever it is. All right, now that I'm out of that moment, let me think about what were the triggers that made me react that way. How did the dog react? And so you're really focused on this one event, or it could be one aspect of your life. It could be your purpose. It could be a lot of different things. But there is some purpose to that reflection. You're trying to grow from it. You're trying to get closer to living the kind of life you want to live, serving your purpose, being the kind of person you want to be. Rumination is just getting stuck and dwelling on something, but without any goal, without any kind of a learning goal for it, would be the way I would divide it up.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good definition. Rumination is almost always looked at negatively, and I think that there's a good reason for that. It would seem to me that maybe the difference between the two would be rumination is kind of a it's almost singular in its intent, whereas reflection is drawing on different streams of thought, right? You're, like you said, there's a purpose. So as a result, even if you're just thinking about one event, you're drawing on different things in order to sort of create meaning from that event, right? So you're right. saying, okay, well, this is what happened. So why did it happen? What did it do? What could I do differently? You're bringing in different scenarios, almost like you're trying to piece together a puzzle, whereas rumination is just focusing on this happened, this happened, this happened,
right.
And sort of digging a hole with it. Does practice have to be a physical act?
Oh, no. I mean, and this is a little bit confusing because Aristotle said something like to be a musician, play music. To become a builder, build things, or to become a carpenter, build things. And so some people think that he was talking about specific skills, but I don't know that that's really right. It can be training your thoughts. You can become a more thoughtful person, a more reflective person, a more purposeful person without really, having some particular skill in a physical activity. I mean, you're a musician, so your fingers bleed, you build up the calluses, and you get better and better and better, and you keep at it. And the things that you had to really pay attention to when you first got started, you just do. I played trombone for a while, and it's hard. It doesn't have set valves like other instruments do. So exactly where a note is varies with humidity and temperature and a lot of other things. And at first it's really hard to figure out where that particular note is. But after you've played for a long time, your ear just hears it, your body senses the differences in the temperature, and you adjust the slide position and your breath and that kind of thing to get the right note. And so this does work for physical things, but I think it works equally well for mental activities. I'll give you an example. I used to be a inside the car rage driver. So I've never had a terribly bad temper externally. I mean, not for a long time. So I would save it for when I was driving. And I would just, I wouldn't roll down the window and flip people off and that kind of thing. I'd just yell at them in the car. I mean, they had no idea I was yelling at them. So I figured, what's the harm? Well, when I started dating my wife, I'd do this and I'd notice her almost kind of draw into herself. And it turns out her father had a terrible temper. And so anytime he got set off, bad things are going to happen. And I think a lot of people have had that kind of an experience. Well, I made a decision that I love this woman and I did not want to make her feel that way. So over time, I had to consciously stop. Okay, somebody cuts me off in traffic. Instead of yelling and screaming, I'm just going to, ignore it. And over time, this became a habit to the point at which this was kind of funny. I grew up in Orlando and I was down visiting my family and was going out with a couple of friends that I'd known the husband since 7th grade and the wife since 10th grade. And the wife looked at me and she said, "When did you become a calm driver?" And I hadn't thought anything about anything that was going on in the road making me angry. I just had become a calmer driver. And so it was this same thing. I paid attention, noticed the effect that my actions were having on another person that I cared about, reflected on how to rein that in, practice, habit, then became a calm driver. Relatively speaking, I'm still not the calmest driver in the world, but
Right. Yeah. So seeing this pattern develop across all these things, and that's a really good example. And music is a good example for me, where, like we were saying, you have to really focus and really pay attention and really practice at these smaller steps in order for them to become automated. And then you take bigger chunks and more advanced things and that you're thinking about and practicing. And I remember one time explaining to somebody, they're asking, well, how many hours a day do you practice guitar, right? And I said, well, I don't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to practice for an hour. I'm going to practice for 2 hours or something. I practice based off of where I think I need help, right? So if it's a speed thing, sure, I'll sit there and I'll practice for, do some rote scales or something. But there's also been times where I didn't pick up the guitar for a month because I knew that I had fallen into autopilot and these sort of rote routines, and I needed to break out of it. So instead I went and I read music theory and I looked at some of these different things. And I consciously avoided picking up the guitar because if I did, my fingers would just go to doing the same thing that they had always done, right? So to me, that's still practice, right? I didn't touch the guitar, but I was still practicing guitar because I was developing different thoughts about music, different thoughts about how to approach the instrument. And then when I did pick it up, I was learning something new and doing something different with it. So yeah, practice it's an interesting topic to me because, like I said, if you were to ask me, right, what do you do, right? And like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, my answer would probably be learn. That's what I do. And so I got my master's degree in education, learning about how to learn. And now I'm moving into psychology to actually try to understand the physical processes that happen in the brain and how people apply them. So this idea of practice to me is it's kind of like you said. Learning is something that it used to take me a long time to figure things out. I'd read and I'd reread and I'd do these things. And now it's gotten to the point where I've been focusing on learning so long, and I've been practicing learning so long, that a lot of new things come easier than they used to. When I first took math in college, I had a really hard time with it, and it freaked me out. And for years, I told myself I was bad at math, right? And then I started my doctorate and said, well, you got to take advanced statistics or you can't be a doctor. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'm going to take that class first just to figure out if this is for me or not, right? And I was scared and leading up to it. And then the first day of class, I said, listen, I'm not going to tell myself that I'm bad at math. It's a logical, rational thing. Like if I take it at the beginning and I make sure that I understand a step before I move on to the next step, I can do this, right? I got an A in my math class. So, so that's kind of that idea of practice and this sort of, like you said, the self-directed concept of it.
Well, that's also reflection. I mean, you were
right.
engaging in critical self-reflection, and not critical as in criticizing, but critical as evaluative. So what about my own thoughts are getting in the way here? And now I'm going to consciously push those aside. But you had to reflect to figure out what it was that you needed to practice in order to be a person that's good at stats.
Right. Exactly. All right, we're coming up on the end of our hour. What should we talk about that we haven't talked about already? What would you like to touch on?
So I want to touch just briefly on the idea of self-compassion. So one of the dangers in self-leadership is that you're a crappy boss. I mean, we've all worked for that tyrant, who just demanded everything, was hypercritical, and you could never do anything right. And you don't want to be that kind of boss for yourself. And one of the problems with reflection is you can get into your own head and only focus on the things that have gone wrong and not give yourself enough credit for the mere fact that you're thinking about this. If something happens and it didn't go well, if you sit down and try to analyze why that was, you already have put yourself in some pretty rarefied air by being willing to do that and having the awareness of the benefits of doing something like that. So, you can't say, my God, I'm an idiot because I didn't pick up on this cue, or I'm so lazy I didn't do this thing that I should have done. You just have to say, okay, if I had done this other thing, or if I'd reacted differently, maybe it would have had a different outcome. And so next time, I want to know what cues made me react the way I did. And so you examine it a little bit more and, well, it was this thing that set me off, or it was this thing that set me off. And now I'm going to be aware of those. But it's this evaluation, almost like your benevolent teacher. If a teacher, every time you make a mistake in math, wraps your knuckles with a ruler, you're going to be terrified of math. If the teacher says, well, no, stop, see, you have to do this, and then let's do this, and here's where you went wrong, try it again. Okay, that's better. Now let's move on to the next thing. If you're that kind of a benevolent teacher or a benevolent leader to yourself, you'll be much more effective. So you don't want to work for a bad boss, so don't be a bad boss for yourself.
Yeah, no, that's really important. That's something that I struggle with a lot. Because I'll take something. It just happened to me recently, actually. I'm trying to put together an album. It's celebrating the 10th anniversary of the first song that I released. So what I'm doing is I'm remixing and mastering a song from every year in the past 10 years on an album. And it's something, it should be fun, right? I've been doing it. I've been having a good time. Well, I ran into some, I made a mixing mistake that set me back some. And then my recording program crashed and ruined a song and stuff. And I just got so upset. And it was infuriating because I'm trying to reach this deadline and stuff. And eventually I just had to reevaluate, listen, sit down and say, look, this is something that is supposed to be fun, and why are you setting a deadline? Okay, it doesn't have to come out the same day that my first song ever came out. If I get it out sometime this year, then that's good enough. I don't have to impose this artificial deadline on me. All right, the computer crashed. That's what they do. I should be lucky and happy that the data is still there and I can still start from scratch and build it back up rather than having to re-record everything and do all this stuff. And it takes some self-reflection to do that. And my wife helps me with it a lot. I start doing this negative self-talk and she says, hey, would that thing that you just said, would you say that about me? I said, no, I wouldn't call you that. I wouldn't say that about you, right? Well, why are you saying it about yourself then? Like, you're just a person, right? We're all just people. Like, you gotta be kind to yourself sometimes.
Well, and you can't, this is where stoicism comes in. You can't control what's happened. You can only control what you do to some extent, what happens moving forward. I mean, the Stoics would say you can't even really control that, but the moving finger writes and having writ moves on. You can't go back and erase those things. So all you can do is figure out how to deal with the cards you've been dealt. How's that for mixing metaphors there?
I like it. What else? Is there anything else you wanna cover?
Well, I mean, I think I would want to just briefly touch on that idea of control.
Okay.
A lot of what self-leadership is about is trying to take control. And we often are at our lowest points emotionally when we feel like things are just horribly out of control. I mean, COVID kind of exposed that a lot. I just went through, one of our goats got really sick really quickly, never been sick a day in its life. Was, long story, it was at the vet for a while, came back, was a little bit better, got bad again. And I was afraid he was going to die. And we got rid of our horse trailer because we never used it. So we didn't have a trailer and the vet couldn't come get the goat. So I'm trying to, find people that might have a trailer and going crazy. And I took one of the dogs for a walk. And on the way back, I thought, screw this. I'm tired of not having any control over this. And so we put the goat in the back of my wife's little Ford Escape, and she got in the back seat and held it, and I drove to the vet's office. But it was like this anxiety just broke because I didn't focus on all the things I couldn't do. I tried to focus on, okay, what can I do? What can I do right now that's going to possibly help? And that was put the goat in the SUV and drive to the vet's office. And so, we often think about all the things that we can't do or all the bad things that have happened to us. And we really have to get rid of that, having this regret and anxiety over things that have happened in the past and try to look at what's right in front of us. What can I do right now to exert some? And sometimes the only thing you can do is shift your mindset. Things are bad because, in our opinion, they're bad. They're not necessarily objectively bad. We just view them that way. And so if you change, like you said, but thank God, at least all my files are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go out and get a new computer, or I'm going to take this one to the shop, or whatever it is. What is it that I can do in these current circumstances?
Yeah, I was reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius a little while back, and it's along that same line. It's kind of like what you were saying, the integrating the stoicism with that proactive mindset, right? Okay, well, what's done is done. You can't change it, so why are you going to spend all of your mental energy wishing that you could? Like, you might not be able to solve the big problem. You might not be able to take it in one chunk, but there is always something you can do in any situation that is proactive. And Stoics would say that your mindset is that one thing, right?
Right.
If there's nothing
Right.
else you can do, what you can do is say, you know what, I'm not going to let this affect me in that kind of way.
That's right.
So these have both been good nuggets. I ran out of questions, but I am definitely interested in hearing anything else that you want to talk about regarding the topic. You have anything else?
Well, I think we've covered it pretty thoroughly. The other thing I would want to say is remember that finding your purpose can be a lifelong task. It can be constantly refined. So don't feel like you're not making progress if you don't nail it right away. Because it really is the best thing and the worst thing about finding your purpose is that it never ends.
Yeah.
It's just always out there.
Yeah, I love that. We talk about that on the show sometimes. We say, there's people have two kinds of mindsets. They either want answers or they want questions, right? And the kind of people who listen to our shows they want the questions, right? I love asking a question and then not finding an answer, but finding 6 more questions based off of it,
Right.
And that's what's refreshing to me to hear you say that, is that it would be sort of depressing, right? If I was to say, oh, hey, I'm 33 years old and I found my purpose in life.
And I'm
okay,
done.
Well,
and I'm done.
Yeah, sure. You could definitely go the rest of your life attempting to fulfill that. But something about it being a static thing takes away from it. It's good to know that it's a dynamic thing, right? You're going to change. We talk about the ship of Theseus on the show, right? Are you one person throughout your life, or are you different people every time you experience something different? And regardless of what the thoughts are on that, everybody agrees that you change throughout your life.
Right.
And so your purpose and what things are important to you and how you define those things, it might not shift monumentally from one thing to another. If it does, you probably didn't find the purpose the first time, but it's likely to mold and shape and grow over time as you learn more about it and as you practice it and reflect on it and do these sorts of things. But
yeah, it's a lifelong thing, which is what's good about it.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Craig, it was great having you on the show. I hope we can get together again sometime and maybe discuss some other topics.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Until next time, keep pondering.